Hello again, and welcome to another episode of BitNote. We'll be playing video game music and talking about the games that they're from. Hope you enjoy, because they've got some good tracks up ahead for you. Okay, so you know how I just started the show saying I'd be playing music from video games? Well, I lied. Again. Well, kind of. I think if you've been following the show, I seem to have this recent trend recently of playing music from things that are not strictly video games, such as playing music from operating systems, and I think recently playing music that was found in some Korean MP3 player. Well, for this show, I've decided to play music from a video game that doesn't exist. Alright? But, as you may all reasonably question, how can I play music from a game that doesn't exist? Well, fortunately, I'm very lucky in that the fact that the game didn't exist didn't stop the composer from actually making the entire soundtrack for the game. Yes, I know, and don't worry, we're not talking about one of those tragic stories where a couple of people get together and say, we're going to make a game, and then one person does all the work, and then the other person completely doesn't do anything, and so the other guy is left despondent about all this hard work coming for nothing. No, we're not talking about that scenario. We're talking about an artist who decided that he really liked game soundtracks and that he wanted to make a soundtrack that evoked a video game, that made you imagine one, that really made it feel like the ambience of a video game without the technical detail of there needing to be an actual program video game in the process at any point. The guy went a little further than that, of course. He actually created a really nice piece of image art for each individual segment of the game. Each song that in the full soundtrack actually has its own image. So by actually looking at the images and then sitting back and listening to the music, the idea is to kind of like let yourself imagine what sort of the game would be like, how the whole thing flows, just the sort of imagery that comes together. And the sort of imagery, at least in my mind, is a strangely surreal, atmospheric, sort of eclectic one. And it's about this small little organism that's suddenly grown up in a world it doesn't fully understand, and suddenly goes on a quest along this great surreal land across deep, traveling to the core of the planet, to its outer reaches, to these floating islands, and just trying to, and in this surreal landscape, dealing with challenges and stuff to finally reach its almost in some ways bittersweet end. I mean, the fact that the game has already got me talking about it, despite the fact that there isn't actually a game, is something of a testament to it. Maybe someday someone will come up and program the whole thing. I mean, games have been created from less motivation. But regardless of what happens, I think that what we have at the moment is beautiful. The feelings, the emotions, and I think there's just something beautiful about just evoking a feel and atmosphere and helping people to go along with it. The game is called, or the game that doesn't actually exist, so I said technically an album, is called Solace. It has been made by a composer called Tettix, and I'm going to play you the first track of that album or game or soundtrack, which is actually going to be meant to be the stand-in for the title theme of the game. So the title theme of the game is actually also called Solace, so I'm taking it's also the theme of the whole game. But in any event, I'll play it, and I don't know, maybe you can try to imagine a bit about what the game would be like. And so that was Solace, from Solace, which was composed by Tettix. So that was a nice track. If I have time at the end of it, I'll at the end of the show, might play another one from that album. And by the way, just so we're clear, it's completely free to download online at the creator's wishes. So if you want to just listen through the whole thing, there's some great stuff. So, I think it's time we moved into another game now, and this one's slightly more traditional. For a start, it actually exists, which is a very traditional aspect of video games, but also it kind of integrates a couple of aspects we've seen in video games before. It's got the old retro aesthetic, despite the fact it was only made in the last year or so. So you're dealing with pixelated graphics and, bit chiptune soundtrack to make it sound like and feel like it was a game that was released in the early 90s, back when everything was much better than it is now and all that sort of nostalgia stuff. But it's also a bit of a match 3 game, which is similar to like Bejeweled. Of course, it plays completely different to Bejeweled, but it's essentially you've got a row of tiles and you line them up and you match them and then good things happen. But it's not quite that either. The long and the short of this game, which by the way is called 10 Million and made by EightyEight Games, is that you are in a dungeon. And this is not good. So you need to escape, and obviously it's by fighting monsters. Now, it's not the first time in video games you have fought monsters by matching tiles, but the way it does it is kind of fun and interesting on and of itself. Essentially, you are running across on the top of the screen from the left to the right. Every time you hit a monster or reach a chest, you stop until you can continue on. And as you're stopped, you gradually eke back over to the left of the screen. So the entire point of the game is to keep as right as possible, and that's by defeating any monsters that's in your way, and so you'll keep going. But if they hit you, you'll go towards the left. The further to the left you is, you'll hit the end and you'll fail the run. And the further to the right it is, then you'll be able to get more points, you'll be able to survive for longer, and basically keep going, get more points and get more items and stuff. So what is the point of the game? Well, as I told you, you got to escape from the dungeon. And you have to escape from the dungeon by getting 10 million points. Hence the name of the game, 10 million. You have to do this by basically running from left to right. And every time you either deal with a chest, for instance, you have to arrange the grid. There's basically a grid full of colourful tiles in the bottom part of the screen. You can click and move any sort of row or column and move them as much in any direction as you can, as long as it does a match. If you match a key, then if you're standing in front of a chest, it will open. If you're in front of a monster, you can either match up the sword or the magic staff in order to attack the monster that way. And as you can see, you need to be very, very frantic. You need to quickly do all this sort of matching, figure out which situation you are and match in the correct items so that any obstacle or anything that's slowing you down is defeated quickly. You can also sometimes gain items by matching items or defeating monsters, which can help you out. And generally the game is played in very quick spurts. You decide to go on a run, you get as far to the right as possible, you defeat as many things as possible, and then inevitably you fail and you see if your score was high enough for 10 million, and if it wasn't, you don't succeed. So this sounds like a bit of a fun game, and indeed it's probably a little more fun on touch. I played it on the PC, but it's probably more fun on touch-sensitive things like the iPad or things which other platforms it's on. But there's an extra element to it that kind of got me off guard. You see, I'd seen a bit about it. It seemed fun, bright, colourful, and seemed to be a test of skill. Even though that matching games aren't exactly. The point is, I was willing to give it a go. But you see, in my mind, there are two types of games. One type of game, what I call are skill-based. This is essentially, the fact is, you can get better and better at this game, and if a guy who is an expert at the game comes around, sits down and plays the game, they'll be able to blast through it in a moment. A lot of classic games are like that. I mean, the original Mario and Sonic games, of course, but pretty much any game that was a matter of skill, reactions about being strategic, about being smart, everything else like that. Even my dad, who tends to think of old games like the ones that you zap and blast aliens, would technically be these sort of skill-based games. But there's another type of game which I tend to call, and this is kind of unfair because there's not a clear distinction, but I tend to call them more time-based games. And these are games where it's not so much how good you are, it's how much time you put into it. Now, this is kind of unfair, but I mean, one example is the classic, Japanese role-playing games. You might go into a monster. there might be a dungeon with several monsters in them, and you might try to defeat them. But the point is, it doesn't matter how skillful you are, because at the beginning, your numbers for attack and your attack ability of the character in the game and defense and everything is slow. So you defeat the monsters, and then you get experience points in the game. The experience points increases your action and defense. So gradually, each time you battle a monster, your points get stronger until you can gradually are able to defeat more and more monsters. Now, there can be a lot of gameplay to this. You can try to figure out which monsters to attack, how to get, what ways to make you upgrade your character faster, everything else like that. But the fact is, what you're essentially doing is performing a bunch of rudimentary actions in order to increase arbitrary numbers in your character's sheet in order to make future conflicts in the game easier. In other words, what you're doing is kind of a bit of rote actions in order to get better at the game. Now, this, as I've said before in the show, I've been completely turned off to. This is what's in a lot of places called grinding. I told you how there was a game called Contact that completely put me off these sort of mechanics entirely. But at the same time, I realized that it's not good to mark this thing off completely because, like I said, sometimes there's a lot of strategy in figuring out how to speed up the process. Sometimes, it's only part of the process. Sometimes, there's still a lot of chance for skill and involvement and intelligence. And it's just the fact that an expert player can't just sit down and defeat a boss monster unless he's already defeated a bunch of other monsters, it just was always just unkind to me. I just feel that it should be your own ability. And of course, another good aspect is that even if you completely suck at the game, you can just put in your time, your character will get a bit better, and you might take a little longer than a more skilled player, but you'll still get through, which I guess is fine, but just, I don't know, I just always believed in skill. Now, when I got 10 million, I thought it was a type A sort of game, a skill-based game, but I always had the lingering thought in my head that it might be a type B sort of game. Because, I'd seen the screen, there were upgrades involved, there's collecting gold and collecting resources and building up stuff, but I kind of put it aside and played it, and I found out I had a great fun time for the first bit of time. I loved it. I felt this is a skill-based game, but no. It became blatantly apparent that it didn't matter how well I played it in the early stages, I would only have a chance of getting up to that 10 million score point and escaping the dungeon if I kept playing it over and over, getting more and more gold, getting more and more stone and wood, getting more and more upgrades, and finally getting to the end. Damn it. So I wasn't quite sure what to do. I looked at the game, and it was clear that no matter how terribly I played one run of the dungeon, even if I only defeated one monster or opened one chest, I would still get a couple of resources that would be enough to make the next shot at it easier. And I realized that this was killing my desire to get good at this game. Why would I have to try? Why would I have to give it my all to try to get past this next section when it turned out that what I could just do is make 3 mediocre attempts and it would still put me ahead enough? There was no incentive to really push for it when you knew that even if you made a half-hearted attempt, you'd be rewarded enough that it'd still bring you closer to making the game. So I sat down and I looked at it and I thought it a bit more, and I kind of realized something. The game mechanics can be broke down into really simple operations, right? So I figured, if there was a simple process, if there was a simple method that was so simple that as long as you did it enough times, as long as you repeated it with enough time, you'd still get ahead in the game, then why should I be the one doing that simple process? So I dived into a few reference things, looked up some programming resource online about programmatically controlling the mouse and taking screen caps and stuff. And in the process of a day, which I considered, probably more fun than playing the game itself, but then it was an interesting challenge, I designed a program that would start up the game, then make an attempt at the dungeon, then it would quickly analyze all the tiles on the grid. It would do a quick computation which would decide which row or which column would end up causing the most amount of matches. It would then move it and then repeat the process. It didn't care what sort of item was in front of the character. It didn't care about anything else. All it did was dumbly keep moving the tiles, and then when the game ended, it would just restart the game. I effectively created a program to play a video game. That's actually slightly more common. It's called botting, but they're usually played to made multiplayer games and stuff. But I decided, I'm so bored at this. This game is fun, but it just was reaching brick wall. Why don't I just make a program that would just get past all the tedious parts? So I started up, and it seemed to work. It was, at first it would only move the rows, but I later upgraded to move the columns. And I'd set it up, and I'd run it, and it would play the game. And I'd be pretty happy about this. So I got it running and then left the computer. At one stage I went down with my parents and watched Challenger, which was an interesting movie all about Richard Feynman's, the famed physicist, investigation of the Challenger disaster. So I enjoyed that, and I came up to find out that the program was still busy away, earning myself gold and resources and just trying to blast its way through the game. So I'd stop the program and then actually, use the gold that I'd earned to buy more resources and upgrades for my staff and my skill and my armor and everything, and then just let it on again. And so I let the program go on and on. It just kept going further and further, getting more and more upgrades, achieving more and more events. Every so often I'd take over and just use a bit of manual control. And soon enough, I had it at the end. I had reached the final upgrade. I had upgraded all my rooms. And then I and I figured, okay, no excuses. I have everything that I need. It is time to beat this game. And then it was hard. It was very hard. I really had to actually apply myself and learn new techniques and realize that, sometimes it didn't really matter if you were in front of a chest. Sometimes you just better just match up wood, and as long as you matched up stuff on the bottom of the screen, maybe the top stuff would fall down and match up. But long story short, it was a challenge, it was a game, I rose to the challenge, and in the end I beat it and I won. So the moral of the story is there was actually a good game in 10 million. There was actually a fun game involving trying to match up tiles and just trying to get the right combinations, and sometimes it would be luck and serendipity because one of the achievements in the game for matching up so many things is I totally meant that, so even the developers know there's a bit of chance involved. But I really applied myself, and it really made through, and I won in the end, and I got better at it. But this was all after I'd used a computer program to take care of all the boring heavy lifting part while I set about doing other things. Of course, I'd hate to do this for every single game, because games are fun and challenging and really interesting. But if you've already worked out a strategy for continually beating the game, which you can just repeat, well, better to leave a computer program to do it. The music for this video game, and yes, we do actually talk about music in this show, was actually, as I've said, kind of a chiptuney soundtrack that came from a couple of different sources. One of the main themes of the tune was called Left Right Excluded by Matt Klingensmith, and it's actually licensed under Creative Commons license, which means that anyone can use it for their game or anything pretty much. Indeed, that's just what EightyEight Games used, getting the other piece of tracks from music licensing companies. But more about So what you've just heard there was Left, Right, Excluded by Matt Klingensmith, and it has used in the game 10 million by EightyEight Games. Now Matt Klingensmith has kind of a bit of a multi-talented person actually, as I was looking up on him. He deals with programming, robotics, a bit of game development, has indeed music composition, which is you've just heard. He released his music under Creative Commons, which now there's a couple of different variations of this, and I'm not a lawyer yet, but essentially it basically means that you can use it in various different projects. You don't necessarily have to ask permission, though you do have to attribute the person, but you can basically use it in whatever you want, which, like I said, is what EightyEight Games used. The music was released on a brilliant site called opengameart.org. This site is dedicated towards giving it's assisting mainly open source games, although a lot of commercial games can also benefit, or amateur or indie games. But the idea was that a lot of these small games, especially open source ones, tended to have not good art. So the idea was to build a great archive of video game art, be it music, backgrounds, and pixel art, everything, basically 3D art, any sort of game art to be used, so that people could take it and put it into their games just straight like that, and maybe modify them a bit. And as long as they gave proper credits to who composed it, everybody would be happy. Artists would get their art in great games, and a lot of great and open source games would get great graphics to use in their games. As you can see, of course, 10 million wasn't exactly an open source game, but in that case, the license of the music allowed for it. OpenGameArt is just a great resource for anyone developing a game that just wants to get some art resources. You got to check the permissions just to see what it's allowed, but in all cases, it's very, very clear what you can and can't use the art for, so it's just a great source for that. In fact, recently there was a whole big competition called the Liberated Pixel Cup, which is all about just promoting open source or just open development games, and OpenGameArt took part in it. So there was a whole load of people that were just, for a start, making art that was that allowed other people to use, but then, and to be added to opengameart.org, but then also the whole competition for people to make games using this generated art. So it was a great event. It produced a lot of interesting games, and I think I'll probably be talking about one or two of the games in a future show. We'll see how it works out. Well, we're getting up to the end of the show now. I said that if we had enough time, I would play another track from the Solace soundtrack. I know we haven't played much music this show, but that's how it goes. But like I said, I'm going to finish up with another track from Solace, the soundtrack to a game that doesn't exist. And in this case, the track is called Felling Giants. The image that goes with this track is a very evocative one. It seems you are a small creature and an unusual, almost alien life form, and you're dealing with a whole load of other ones similar like you, and together you're ganging up and trying to take down this gigantic, monstrous giant. Hence why it's called Felling Giants. And it's all just about just trying to teamwork to deal with great obstacles, and at least that's what I see in the track. I'll play the music and maybe you guys can make your own decision. Well, this has been David Collins with BitNote. You can follow us on BitNoteFM on Twitter, and we've got a website at BitNoteFM.com. And of course, you can listen to our previous episodes on DublinSouthFM.ie. This has been David Collins with BitNote. I think we've had some good fun with video games.